Welcome, everyone. It's a real privilege to be here, and I'm super excited to introduce our lecturers for tonight. So this is our biannual Fumihiko Maki lecture in urban design. This lecture honors the legacy of Maki, who was the architect of Steinberg and Walker Halls and the original Kemper Art Museum, and also honors the legacy of our Master of Urban Design program, which is the second oldest in the country, and it turned 60 in 2021, so another birthday lost to COVID. This lecture recognizes designers of national or international renown whose work advances optimism and innovation since modernism. We are particularly excited to have a firm tonight that aligns so well with our own vision as a school of interdisciplinary collaboration, community engagement, equity, and optimism. It is a pleasure to welcome Agency, Landscape and Planning, and co-founders and principals Gina Ford and Brie Hensold. A little bit about each of the co-founders. Gina is a landscape architect committed to the design and planning of public places and the perpetuation of the value of landscape architecture via thought leadership, teaching, writing, and lecturing. She received the Harvard Graduate School of Design's Charles Elliott Traveling Fellowship, the Wellesley College's Shaw Fellowship, and the Boston Society of Architects Women in Design Award of Excellence. She is a co-founder of WXLA, an advocacy initiative for gender justice and design practice founded in 2018. Brie is an urban planner with a passion for understanding and improving communities and places. She brings a systems-based approach that celebrates diverse perspectives which are incorporated into her creative and meaningful community engagement processes. Brie's work encompasses multiple scales, from downtown plans to citywide park systems to resilient strategies. The work of Agency has received many awards from the AIA, ASLA, APA, American Planning Association, and among others. Most recently, according to Instagram, as of yesterday, their Jersey City Master Plan Vision Land Use Open Space is the winner of the American Planning Association New Jersey Chapter's Outstanding Community Engagement Award for 2023. So congratulations. And I wanted to just read a little bit from the website that describes the mission of Agency because I think it's so powerful and again, so aligned with the mission of our school. Agency is the capacity of human beings to act, to make choices. Planning can remove barriers. Design is an act of optimism. Equity and optimism are much needed today more than ever. At Agency Landscape and Planning, we believe in the power of people to initiate and make purposeful, positive change. Agency is a mission-driven practice dedicated to addressing social equity, cultural vitality, and environmental resilience through design excellence, strategic planning, and community engagement. We believe that in order to address the most challenging issues of our contemporary society, diversity and inclusion are foundational to how we see, understand, and ultimately shape our collective experience, particularly in the public spaces, parks, and streets of our cities. We seek opportunities that allow us to partner meaningfully with constituents, that welcome many voices and hands in the process, and that produce outcomes that are deeply connected to the richness and uniqueness of place. So we are excited to see and hear about these projects. Brie and Gina, thank you for joining us here at the Sam Fox School.
That was a lovely introduction. Hi, everyone. So happy to see this lovely crowd. I'm Gina. This is Brie. Let's jump in. We're going to talk to you today we're about 6 years into practice and making, caring, and keeping. We're shifting the focus a little bit in this dialogue away from the what of what we do in design, although we'll touch on that, and more about the who. Who are the cultural systems and the people that we serve through the work, but also that keep the work alive and keep it moving forward, which is actually, honestly, more important sometimes than the what, or maybe equally important. We wanted to acknowledge, in thinking about this idea of continuity of people and of experience, that we're here as a named lecturer, Fumihiko Maki, who I came to understand, came to St. Louis on the recommendation of Hideo Sasaki, who is featured on the left-hand image, teaching and to my mentor, Stu Dawson, who's standing behind Hideo. And Hideo helped Maki come to St. Louis, and then Brie and I both met at Sasaki and started this practice. So let's just say this is a lineage of people that we're here as, or we're part of, and we want to acknowledge and honor that lineage. So we met, Brie and I practiced for 30 years collectively at a firm called Sasaki, where we met Bowman Kim, who I think is a big reason why we are here today. And while we were at Sasaki, we were both principals in that practice, leading a lot of the firm's public work. Myself through the lens of landscape architecture and a lot of waterfront design work, as you can see featured here, and public space design. And then working a lot with Brie in crossover places of flood resilience, of community engagement and activation of public space. And we had quite a great run there and did some really lovely work together and found a partnership that we thought actually could become the foundation of something great if we could create our own practice based on some of the values that we shared. And so in 2017, after a good 20 plus years there for me, we decided to leap and create agency. Brie made these drawings. She's super smart. This talks about the foundation of our practice, which is, in a typical process, planning and urban design are kind of seen as upstream processes that might create a master plan or a framework kind of with episodic community engagement, and then a plan is created and it's put somewhere with the hopes and dreams that someone else will pick it up and move it forward, and that political will stay consistent with it and move that vision forward. And then sometimes the landscape architect comes in and then realizes the vision. And we found this to be wholly unsatisfying, especially the more we worked together, and realized that this was a way that the community wasn't empowered throughout, and in a way that the design and planning weren't informing each other. And so we very much see our practice as existing 3 parallel streams that run side by side: planning, landscape architecture, and community as a thread that's always interwoven and linked through. Parallel processes, not a handoff from one scale to the next, but as a fluid and mutually reinforcing design process. And we believe that when these things intersect over time, Brie thinking about, strategy, climate shifts, economic and demographic patterns, the kinds of things that planners think about very deeply and care about deeply, whereas I, as a landscape architect, think about grounded natural systems and experience and activation, and the kind of care of the landscapes that we make. At the very core of them, we believe that when you think about both scales at the same time, you create community benefits that are long-lasting. And again, it's kind of this idea of continuity of experience and longevity. You just heard our mission statement. I've never heard it read aloud like that, so we really appreciate we're both probably sitting there listening, being critical, because we wrote it a long time ago. But we're about a practice between 25 and 30 people, about half landscape architecture and half planning, mostly based in Cambridge, Massachusetts, but also with small presence in Philadelphia and Chicago. And at the core, as you can see, that thread of community engagement weaves through our work. We see ourselves as being kind of curators of a conversation with community that enables them to write the story of the future, and we're very much a facilitator in that dialogue. So we have a lot of fun thinking about how to facilitate and how to design a facilitation process as meaningfully, again, as the places that we design. And in our 6 years of practice, we started in 2018, we have touched projects all over the country. We work on things as large as like the state of Maryland's park system, to a third of an acre plaza in Charlotte, to places all over the country, as you can see, and a pretty even split of large-scale strategy and site-specific design and construction.
So Gina talked a little bit about how we think about the role of planning and design as sort of a moment or a tool within broader community practices and stewardship and the kind of long-term lived experience of places. And part of that is because through our experience working together, we've kind of seen what happens when that doesn't exist, that kind of continuous stewardship, continuous care, continuous reinforcement of ideas. There's not a single moment where something is born and then exists and kind of lives and thrives. It needs to be continued to be nurtured. Part of our work together came out of Rebuild by Design, which was a competition after Hurricane Superstorm Sandy in the Northeast in New York and New Jersey. And we kind of learned and saw there the role of politics to make or break funding, to make or break implementation, to make or break the ability of a community to implement what it wanted to implement. And so we see what happens in places when there isn't community ownership and when there isn't political will, and see that there's a really important role for design and planning to play to kind of foster that and enable that to be born and reinforced. We've also been working together recently in Boston and Franklin Park, which is Boston's largest park and kind of a central gem within the city and part of the Emerald Necklace, an Olmsted landscape as well. But what's happened over time there is that Franklin Park has also become a symbol of some of Boston's challenges, the challenges that large park systems and urban park systems face across the country in terms of reinvestment and care and stewardship of these big significant landscapes, and also kind of a significant dividing line within the city between demographics, income, and so a place where people don't feel connected, although it is this kind of heart. We see, too, the opportunity of places that do have stewardship, and this is the Chicago Riverwalk that Gina showed before as well, where through the kind of determined nature of one individual, Michelle Woods, who you can see up here, from start to finish, seeding the idea for what transformation could be, doggedly getting funding, continuing to commit to and preserve and manage the place over time, operate it and manage it and make sure that it succeeds. It's become the place that it is. So not just a single moment of design invention, but really this kind of long-term commitment to place. And then we see too, and this is that third of an acre park that Gina mentioned, probably the smallest project in Agency's portfolio so far in Charlotte, right at the kind of intersection of Trade and Tryon, the kind of downtown heart of Charlotte, this important plaza that was created by Aunt Angela Denejeva, who created this incredible kind of brutalist fountain and landscape, and we went into that project thinking that this was going to be reinvented and learned instead that it should really be preserved. But there was a inconsistent support for that, and so ultimately the project we are no longer part of, and it's been torn down and is being revisited in a different way. So there are moments too, you know, this stewardship needs to transcend generations, needs to transcend leadership, or else you lose some of what's really important. And so we think of that as this kind of cycle of making and keeping and caring of places where design has a really important role at many different points in the process, and that role can and should change, but needs to consider all these different pieces, not just kind of design and construction, but also funding, community input, governance, maintenance, and stewardship over time. And so we want to show you 3 stories to go a little bit deeper into that have really taught us a lot about all of those different elements that are critical for that kind of ecosystem to work. Boston Design Vision in our hometown of Boston, Massachusetts, the Albina Vision Community Investment Plan in Portland, and a built landscape in Sarasota, Florida. So we'll start with looking at a citywide design vision for Boston. This was sort of a first of its kind project conceived by a new administration under Mayor Michelle Wu to think about how can the city grow to 800,000 people. It's a little bit over its past peak in a way that is equitable, that is inclusive, and that is by design. And so to grow, the plan was really acknowledging that if we don't have design as a foundation of growth, if it's unfettered, we'll instead have a place that lacks that stewardship, that is homogenous, that is inequitable, and that doesn't align with city processes. This plan is really only exists because of the will and the commitment of a team of incredible leaders at the City of Boston who are willing to kind of chart a course and outline a scope that's really different than anything that we've seen other places. There are some other kind of parallel processes, Atlanta by Design, these plans that kind of say we need to take a moment and pause in our city and not just think about the functional systems of transportation, of development, but instead to think about place and people and kind of what is the fabric of who we are. And so Diana Fernandez-Bibeau, Mayor Michelle Wu, and Brie Outlaw, really the kind of 3 critical stewards who we hope will also be the stewards of this plan in the future. The design vision starts with a foundation of principles about what the role of design is and how it should operate within the city in the future to kind of achieve those goals. The first is to design from observation, a place to look first, to build on what you see, to build on the unique attributes of each neighborhood, and be informed by what's already happening there. To design beyond boundaries, and this is really important for a city that knows that they have to decide where they focus design energy, where they focus care and investment, and so what the design vision found is that it's really those places between, the transitions between public and private, between buildings and landscape, between different systems, where that care can really go a long way. To reinvent and to innovate, so to think about not just the historic systems, but also how you can start to introduce more experimentation in place, even in a historic city like Boston, that can still be part of the identity, part of the future. To retrofit places according to what you see how places are being used, how they are not working for the people who are using them, and build in systems that care around them. And to really use climate resilience, a challenge of our future, as a foundation for opportunity. And then finally, to amplify community assets. So a big part of this project was community engagement, which we won't talk about a ton tonight, but what we really saw as kind of critical going forward is to look to the community in each neighborhood around each project and look to them to identify the assets that really are defining features of their neighborhood. So the design vision lays out this idea that great design can only happen as part of that community process, that you need to start with the who, be willing to be inspired beyond what you know, to look elsewhere for that inspiration, to ideate and innovate, and then to ground your ideas very closely in place for realization. I'll pass it to Gina.
So really daunting to create a design vision for a whole city. And a lot of what we did, as you can see, was really describe a way of seeing and coming to know the place that we feel like is oftentimes absent from design process, which looks at an independent block as an independent building and doesn't think about the system. So as part of the process, we reached out and talked to experts from around the country with different ideas about diversity and different facets of understanding, everything from folks that specialized in deafscapes to folks that specialized in neurodivergent landscapes to spatial justice advocates. And we interviewed all of them and kind of gathered key ideas. We listened, so Brie said we're not going to talk too much about community engagement, but we did a summer of pop-up last year at different community events, mostly in the neighborhoods of Boston that are most likely to experience change with growth, so that we could be ahead of it and really learn from the community. We actually took vernacular analysis walks as a design team, something we highly recommend as part of the process, and the city is now thinking about incorporating that in their design process when working with developers. They actually have to go and do a checklist of looking and trying to understand the place and documenting its fabric, its materiality, what's working, its community, and then having that be part of the work rather than just bringing something from outside. And then a real process of co-creation. This was a pop-up we created at Boston City Hall Plaza, where we spent 2 days out on the plaza, letting people kind of walk around and experience different stations of design that talked about different aspects of life and could tell us a little bit about what they need and what they see in the landscape as it changes. And ultimately we came, and this is, Brie didn't say this, but this is still a work in progress. We haven't shown this work before publicly, so it's very much still on the boards, and we're in the process of wrapping it and talking a lot about it with the client team. But these 3 themes really came up as the major pieces to think about, again, the spaces between buildings, to redefine the home, or to start thinking about how to advocate for new forms of home in a place that's changing in order to maintain and preserve diversity, but also welcome new folks to our city. And then Boston is a convoluted grid of weird places, wonderful weird places that have basically lots of little towns that have been agglomerated over time into the city of Boston. And so those main streets and squares become a reflection of diversity in and of themselves. It's sort of like diversity as a whole. And so that was really inspiring to us. This is a synthesis of some of the community feedback that we heard that nested within these ideas of spaces between buildings and the home. and main streets. And so this was us asking the community to share with us what felt like Boston, what felt like their place, what felt important to hang on to or to codify in a series of guidelines and recommendations. So this is a collage done by the wonderful artist, graphic designer, and urban designer, Mel Isidore. She participated on our walks, vernacular analysis walks, as part of our team. And after our walks, she would create these collages that really spoke to this idea of the vernacular analysis. What is this place made out of? How does it feel? Not just in plan, but actually understanding the real texture of place. And then this gives us a lens through that community feedback to then say, what does home mean? What does it look like in Allston? What does home mean or Main Street look like in Allston? And what do the spaces between buildings feel like? Not to codify preservation, but to really understand as a moment to then evolve and address. And then these are drawings that we've begun making just as sort of dividers or chapter headers in our own mind of kind of the major topics we want to tackle as part of our recommendations. The first is really thinking about innovating the spaces between buildings, really acknowledging and celebrating a unique scale of Boston, but thinking about how to transform our open spaces to welcome more diverse kinds of uses and community. A really wonderful and big part of the work was during our vernacular analysis walks. We saw that people were struggling to use Boston streets for the things they needed to use it for. You know, moms with kids trying to entertain them and they're like trying to run out into the street, or like someone who's fixing a car in a lay-by on a street. And so we really wanted to codify not just the kind of complete streets idea of different lanes of travel and the bikes go here and the cars go here, but kind of like what's the life of the street that we need to promote in Boston and how can we think about expanding those. So my personal favorite here is the chill street. Just the idea of like really welcoming people to loiter and to listen to music and to have pop-up incubator spaces for business. We saw a lot of this kind of opportunity for open streets, really taking over streets with temporary public spaces. Lots of opportunity for play streets in the neighborhoods where there are families, and thinking about how to make those more hospitable to those uses. And I think Boston's doing pretty well in its planning around green streets and about kind of heat resilience, and so that was something we wanted to acknowledge and nod to as well. We also think there's a tremendous amount that can be done in Boston's parks. This is one particular park, and we used it as sort of a model to think about what were some of the ideas to advance a diversity and more inclusive vision for the future of Boston's parks. So everything from thinking about what makes parks feel more welcoming, safe, and inclusive, building on the great work of Mitchell Silver in New York City and his Parks Without Borders, Without Boundaries project. Health and wellness, really thinking about everything from fitness and everyday activity, but also mental health and spaces that promote kind of general well-being. Multi-generational spaces, so thinking about 8 to 80, as we call it, parks that really serve a broad range and multi-generational use. And then again, climate adaptation as part of the work. Also a lot of discussion about what home is, what home means. I think a lot of discussion about the triple-decker, which is really, if anyone's ever lived in Boston, is the famed housing type. If you watch like Mystic River, it's all triple-deckers everywhere you look. I live in a triple-decker, you live in a triple-decker. It was a workforce housing boom from last century, and it's created this model of housing. And our client team asked us, what's this generation's version of a triple-decker? How do we accommodate the workforce of today and the diverse kinds of family that are in Boston? So as you can see, some of the things that we found were quite simple. We talked about the notion of balcony and of porch and of being part of the civic life. Balconies and porches are like the first things that get edited out of design with cost, but it's like the most important thing that people brought up again and again as having a sense of community. So advocating for that, advocating for things like accessory dwelling units to make sure that families that had different kinds of configurations could live together. What am I forgetting? New models that transcended some of the housing stock that's being built in Boston today that just has a sameness. So these are some of the strategies that we brought to the table, just really thinking about, again, diversifying housing types, thinking about housing types for multi-generational families, thinking about allowing other kinds of density and bonuses for density, and then lots of different examples of creating livable spaces with things like convenient, safe, outdoor space, et cetera. we were kind of stunned and continue to be at just how important the interface between the home and the street was, and all of the dialogue we had with the community about what made home home. So everything from the way you experience a porch or a balcony to how porous your relationship to the street is and how generous the relationship between the street and the home is. So this was us trying to kind of codify some of that so the city can consider that, and when they're dealing with development, making sure that those really livable spaces are included. And we saw different typologies of that across our city. And then lastly, when we did a Mad Lib exercise with the community where we asked them to tell us about how they knew they were home, what it smelled like, what it looked like, what it felt like. 90% of the Mad Libs talked about food and small businesses. So they would say, oh, I'm from Mattapan, and I know I'm home when I see like Za's restaurant, you know, for example. I don't even know if that's real, but there's nothing right now in the way that Boston deals with development that allows for there to be some inclusion of small business, of incubator spaces. A lot of the new development is really kind of large floor plates that have single ground floor occupants. So this was our way of saying, let's figure out how to preserve Main Street, what keeps it so central and core in its identity, invite more density and development as that happens, but make space for small businesses and give outdoor spaces to allow those businesses to thrive. So just some of those things, thinking about diversifying floor plates to allow for smaller businesses and incubation, creating ground floor store units that have a really lovely rhythm that feel like a great city street and don't feel like a monolith, really welcoming an exchange of inside-outside along the street. As you can see here, and then really embracing the opportunity of public art to be part of that experience as well. Okay.
So that final plan is still in progress, as Gina said, and we're trying to figure out now what kind of the implementation metrics are there and how the city will move that forward and roll it into their code or other policies. I'm going to talk now about a plan that the vision plan is completed, and then the client team is really moving it forward with a lot of momentum and energy, and this is the Albina vision plan. Can we highlight that? In Portland, Oregon. And so just to give you a sense of where we are now, we're on the east side, kind of northeast side of Portland, right across the Willamette from the Pearl District, and just north of downtown. So if you've been there, you probably drive through it. You might have gone to a hockey game, you might have gone to a really large-scale event, but you might not realize that it was once home to over 800 single-family homes. This was kind of the heart of Black Portland, which extended far north, kind of into North Albina as well, and that went through significant urban renewal in the 60s with I-5, the interstate that came through, and then these kind of mega structures that were built there, the Moda Center, the Memorial Coliseum, that completely erased all of those homes, all of those businesses, all of that cultural memory. And so the Albina Vision Trust is a nonprofit who has been working to think about how can we advocate for our community to come back, to reimagine this as a neighborhood, as a place that we're not making from nothing, that we're remaking from a long history, from a lot of memory, a lot of generational trauma, and also a lot of care for this place. And so AVT had started with an analysis where they looked at what if Albina had not experienced urban renewal and there were still homes there were still businesses there, and they found that that was about $1 billion in generational wealth that was lost as a result of urban renewal just within this small district. And so the plan itself had a really core mission, which I think is something that we don't often think about in such a focused way, but they defined it really clearly for us that this was about a new kind of community in Lower Albina, a new and brighter future, acknowledging that it's a special place and it would be special again, despite history. And so the project team was really integrated and worked very side by side in a much kind of more integrated way than I've typically experienced, and I think has been an inspiration for our teams moving forward, working very closely with the client team led by Winto Johannes and Rakaya Adams, working really closely with artists, specifically Kane Talton Davis and Cleo Davis, who are very locally rooted and brought a very different lens of how to kind of attack a problem of design and planning. And then an interdisciplinary team that also had a lot of overlap. So we had 2 economists, we had multiple urban designers, we had planners, architects, and landscape architects, and we all kind of made space at the table and worked together rather than worried about turf or territory. And I'll say too, this was led by El Dorado, kind of as prime. They led a really flat collaborative process, and I know they're coming to lecture here in a couple weeks. One thing that was really central to the plan, a lot of the community engagement happened during COVID. We started the project right before COVID, and then, like many, things were a victim of it, but the client really wanted to continue to not lose time, not lose momentum, and I think that was really ultimately smart. And so we translated everything to kind of either socially distanced or online events, and we partnered with a lot of community leaders and invited them to be hosts for these online meetings. So one of my most memorable community meetings was, I think, one of the first kickoffs where the design team, in our way, kind of curated a set of precedents and projects that we thought would be inspirational. We wanted to hear from the community, and then we turned that presentation over to these 4 community leaders you see on the right, and they presented it back. And so they presented how they viewed all these precedents, and it was super helpful, and it got the conversation going with the community in a really different way than if we had brought our lens, our words, our interpretation. The other thing that was really focused about this project and really helpful was the kind of clarity of the engagement approach, which defined very clearly the kind of language and tone. When Linda introduced us, she talked about kind of the lens of optimism at the school, and that was something that AVT really has brought from start to finish to this project, this idea that yes, there was a past that was really challenging and is still present today, but they want to be really optimistic, future-focused. They want to recognize that the community exists, has will, has strength, and is there, and so really center that optimism. And it was a very powerful thing for the workshops, for the conversation, and ultimately for fundraising. We also, Kane Talton Davis, who was one of the artists on the team, has a really strong graphic design identity, and so that's another team member, another discipline that we often collaborate with. And so she brought that tone, that language to the project itself, and this was kind of how we talked about each of the engagement workshops that were the milestones and kind of threaded and drove the project forward. Those 6 workshops were kind of the backbone of the project, and as designers, it was really hard because we kept, after that first workshop, we were ready to take pen to paper, ready to get out a map, ready to draw place and ideas, and the client team and Kane and Cleo said, hang on, we're not there yet. The community's not there yet. They're not ready to see what you think this should be. We need to keep talking. And so we really spent a lot of time just having conversations about similar ideas to what we talked about in Boston Design Vision, home, landscape, and kind of just how do you experience place, how do you imagine your neighborhood. And ultimately 5 kind of themes rose to the top, and they became the framework for the plan. This idea it would be a place that generated a sense of belonging, that provided access to nature, even in a really urban environment, one that today has really no nature, that would rebuild wealth within the Black community. You saw that loss at the beginning as a framer, create a rich variety of places to be in, and also reinforce shared social support, which when the community was kind of fragmented to all parts of the county outside of Portland, some of that was lost. And so through those workshops, which were interactive online, you can see an image here where we asked people to draw their own island. What are the things that you need on your own desert island? And that was youth to elders kind of drew their ideas, schools. Some people had a new currency, no money. There was a whole conversation that I had with a group of kids who were imagining that this was a new neighborhood totally underwater in the Willamette River that they were going to occupy. And then at the very end of the conversation, they were like, but how would we breathe? And so it was a very, very fun, though, and fruitful process where we kind of learned what was important and what the values were, that people wanted to be in a place where they were with neighbors who looked like them, who created that sense of belonging, where children could feel safe, where it was age-friendly. where nature was really present. That's a huge value within the Portland region, and wanted that to be brought back to Albina. And so you can see kind of what that meant to the people who participated. And then really importantly, this was almost kind of the highest level principle to rebuild wealth within the Black community. And people very much held the plan to, yes, that's an aspiration, but the really important thing is how. How are you going to govern that? How are you going to ensure that? How are we not going to just make that be a vision? So out of those brainstorms, we also kind of took all of the ideas and said every single one matters. We found precedents for each one. We tried to imagine how that would translate to a physical form. Even ideas that were building on the arena, no cars, all of these things, we tried to think, what have we heard and how could we make that real here? And then we took the next step of programming. So at this point, we're maybe like 60% of the way through the process, and we're just starting to talk about not even a plan of the place, but we're just starting to talk about program. And we translated their ideas into these kind of vignettes of what a place might be, that indoor, outdoor really mattered, that people needed places to relax and be happy, that housing needed to take a lot of forms and be really thoughtfully about kind of rebuilding that generational wealth, that it was one of the most important tools that we had in remaking the neighborhood, and that thinking about commercial space also really needed to be nuanced, create places where people could start new businesses, where they could meet and learn and be mentored. So it wasn't just about office space, it was about a really different type of hub. And then we started to have conversations about density. We had a big fear, I think, and the client team did too, that everyone would just want 800 homes, 800 single-family homes rebuilt on the site. But the challenge was that wasn't the way to rebuild wealth today. That wasn't going to be the way to spread wealth amongst the greatest number of people and create the greatest access to open space that people wanted to see. So we had this discussion about the trade-offs of all the different spatial decisions people would make. How if you had a low-density neighborhood, you might have a lot of opportunities for new contractors to get in. That would be a really great outcome. But you wouldn't realize the full financial potential, you wouldn't rebuild wealth, you would have really limited shared green space because that type of neighborhood doesn't really afford large parks. And so instead, if you looked at a medium density neighborhood, you would have a lot more shared green space, you could have more employment, so you'd get some more of those jobs that you wanted to see. And we started to play with the dials there and really have that conversation. And ultimately, where we've landed is much more kind of medium density to higher density. But you can see it's really about kind of figuring out that spectrum across the site. We talked too a lot how this was a plan for returning home. That was something that the Albina Vision Trust said over and over again. We're returning, we're bringing people back who want to come back. But that home was a lot more than housing, and you didn't have to live in this new neighborhood in order to be at home there. So creating places where you could work, where you could visit, where you could come to the park, where you could experience learning, and then all of those were a way to get at some of that aspect of home. And so the ultimate vision that was created really looks at kind of trying to integrate and work with what is there today. AVT wanted a plan that could be realized. They didn't want a plan that relied on taking the highway down fully or that relied on relocating the arenas, because they wanted to act now. And that's what they've been doing, which is amazing to see. And so I think some of the kind of key pieces of their implementation is about building a movement around this project. And they've used design as a tool to really galvanize energy, to galvanize fundraising, to provoke and have a discussion through really strong communications, to celebrate their visible early wins. One of the projects that they got out of the gate with right away is a small mixed-use development that is not really super different than a lot of other developments that might happen in a city, but what they did, they're doing it really differently. They're groundbreaking. They said, we're gonna have a party instead of having a political photo shoot. And so they've tried always to make the community centered and to do it in their own way. All right.
Our last case study, we're going to go down on the ground and talk a little bit about our landscape architectural practice. This is the Sarasota Bay Park, a project we've been working on all 6 years of agency. It was actually one we won just before we left Sasaki, and I had the great pleasure to stay on through the master planning process as the lead designer in consultation or in collaboration with Sasaki, and then agency has been leading it for the past 5 years through a series of implementation. If you haven't been to Sarasota, Florida, it's a beautiful, incredible climate of tropical vegetation, of great sunsets over the bay. It's the western coast of Florida, so you get sunsets over the Gulf of Mexico. It's protected by the Keys, which are the greatest beaches in the country, according to a lot of sources, and just a really, really incredible, very, very tactile and beautiful landscape. The project was the origination, and again, this is talking about the continuity of people. It was a citizen-led, guerrilla kind of organization, a series of folks in the community who identified through this group they call Bayfront 2020, this 53-acre underutilized city-owned parcel of land on the waterfront that what they saw was not living up to its full potential, in a community where a lot of the waterfront is privatized with like condo development for people that come down from the north, for the winter months. And so they saw this 53 acres as the opportunity for Sarasota to have its own signature waterfront park in a way that it doesn't have today. And so this timeline's just showing you, as part of our work, it wasn't just about planning the 53-acre site, which we did, but it was also about shepherding the client through a transition from a guerrilla organization of citizen committee into a fully fledged conservancy, which now is owning and moving the project forward in partnership with the city of Sarasota. And so it's been this ongoing kind of roller coaster of getting people organized around this site and this opportunity. The site on the left-hand side is a 53-acre site on the bayfront, as you can see. It was a cultural district that was filled in on the bay. This probably was marshland at one point, and they filled it in to create this, the biggest parking lot you've ever seen. I think it's like 880 cars can park on this site, all for that purple building called the Van Wezel Performing Arts Facility. As you can see, there's also a series of facilities along this main road that are all nationally designated historic facilities. Sarasota has the incredible Sarasota Modern School of Architecture, so these are like gems of architecture, but they're within a landscape of parking lots, basically. It's kind of a hard gray surface. Our master plan, and again, this is the one I co-led with Sasaki, was really about transforming gray to green and thinking about the site as a much softer, much more human-centric place with a new performing arts center that Renzo Piano is in the process of beginning the design process on. So we sort of set the table for that facility and also created a series of park places and spaces that could be transformed over time. And so our first project is, we were lucky enough when we finished the master plan to have so much goodwill built through an extensive community engagement process and about a year of time to coalesce around this vision. Immediately they raised the funds to build a first phase project, which is called the Community Park on the south side, about 10 acres of open space. And then all of the rest of it is other phases of design. We're kind of designing 2 or 3 pieces right now, but we've realized the Community Park, so I thought I'd show you that today. This is the Community Park. It's on the south side of a mangrove inlet. All of the water from the city of Sarasota, untreated, comes down the hill and goes through that inlet out to the bay, like a great majority. And when we came to see this mangrove inlet, it was really degraded and overgrown and very sad. So a big part of our work has been the restoration of this. On the south side, it's been about creating this kind of first out of the gate opportunity for a public park space with a concession building, some lawns, some play spaces, a lovely little beach, and eventually a kind of spiral boardwalk that takes you out over the water. It's so funny, all 3 projects really start from this idea of guiding principles. And so when we came on board, even before we began the master plan, the client team, the community advisory group had already created a series of principles that became given to us. This is what we want, enact this in physical design. And so they had high aspirations. They loved this idea of a blue and green oasis, a place that really could transform from a gray space to one that really treated stormwater and restored environments. They wanted someplace that was economically sustainable and feasible over time and connected, that had a new kind of cultural vitality. So this is the Realized Place. It just opened last year in 2022, and as I said, it's one of a number of places. You see the mangrove inlet, which we've gone through extraordinary effort to remove exotic species, to trim, to really bring that back to life in a really healthy way, and then to realize this community park that at times is really about activated space, and at times really about kind of quiet, more intimate spaces. It's also the portal for the community out onto the waterfront. So actually the very first piece of infrastructure we built was this ADA accessible kayak launch, which felt really befitting. It was sort of signaling to the community that this was a new portal for them to experience the bayfront and to get out onto it. Here you are kind of coming down the city's main street, and you see the connection to the waterfront. This would have been just sort of parking lot in the past, so a really huge transformation from a gray space to a much greener one. Really a lot of care taken to both plant new trees, as you can see from the alley of royal palms along the left, but also to preserve existing trees and to move some really ginormous live oaks that were on site to preserve those. See, these are black olive trees that we worked around very delicately that existed. When we first interviewed for the project, the client team was really interested in Zudi architecture. Like, they were interviewing some other folks that do much more flashy design work than we do. And they said to me, "What's the wow you're gonna bring to the project?" And I said, it's probably the sunset and the sky, because this is what they experience every night. And I was like, we just need to find a place to get people down by the waterfront to experience this and have this backdrop every night. So this was the small beach that we created, and what we call the sunset node, which is a kind of a deck built around this existing live oak tree. And every night you go there, there's something happening at the sunset. People come here to watch it and to participate in it or to do this yoga. We also really were smitten with a couple of ibis birds that we would see on site that would be roaming through the mangrove, very common in Florida. So when we decided to do a small play space, we worked with a company called Monstrum, a Northern European firm that specializes in play, to create these custom ibises, Sarah and Zoda, Sarasota. We worked with an incredible architect called Sweet Sparkman. This actually, the canopy was in midstream here, but they helped us to translate the main space of the park as what we call the nest, a kind of concession plaza and shaded place for the community. So what you're seeing to the right here is a building that serves, hot dogs and food to park goers, but also has restroom facilities for longer stays. This canopy was midstream. Now it has a shade kind of canopy that covers it, so it becomes this incredible venue. They do dances and weddings and all kinds of performances, and a small event space we call the Oval, where they do their movie nights. But beyond just those offerings, kind of traditional park offerings, everything that we've done on this project has been about this principle of the blue and green oasis. We have, for instance, our client team committed to treating every drop of that dirty water coming from the city before it goes into the bay, which is an extraordinary expense for one project at the bottom of a watershed to pick up. But through the use of baffle box technology, a denitrification trench, which is kind of a continuous stormwater system, lots of different stormwater gardens, we really did commit to treating all of that water. And now we're in the next phases of design, and we're finding other ways to treat water elsewhere. Not just treating it, but interpreting it, making clear both through things like this upper thing. This is the top. It's like a glass lid on top of the baffle box where you can open it and climb down in and see how the water is filtered as it goes into the bayou or the mangrove inlet. And that's like the #1 tourist destination on our site. People really want to experience it. I couldn't believe that people wanted to go see that, but they do. In fact, our client was like, in future phases, we need something as sexy as the baffle box. And I'm like, really? Anyway, we wanted to have, in contrast to that kind of community park, mown lawn, activated space, places that were much more about the natural heritage of the space, much more intimate in its scale. So this is a part of the mangrove walk. It's the kind of continuous walkway that loops around the mangrove. We found moments along this path that we created where there was special vegetation. In this case, it was a pair of live oaks side by side. And I thought, that should be the gateway for the walkway. We should create something that signals you're entering a new space. And so we designed this deck and seating element to kind of signal And then within each of these decks, there's etching in the ground that tells you the story of the vegetation that you're passing by. So it's like signage without being signage. It's telling a story about the heritage of the place. And then the path itself, we really wanted to cater to a population in Sarasota that's a lot older. It's a much older population generally than other places across the country, and a lot of older folks that are still very active. And so we actually created this walkway out of rubber. It's a rubberized surface, so it's kind of like a running track. It's got a little buoyancy to it, and when you get old like me and your knees start going, like a little buoyancy really helps. You can walk further. And so people come and just do this loop on the rubber path. Here's another view. As you can see, this is one of the enormous black olive trees that we built the nest around, and I'm just including it as part of the Blue and Green Oasis chapter here because working around a tree like this and creating a human-scaled space, but letting it thrive and have all of the nutrients it needs was a very big challenge, and we did this on lots of different places. So this is actually a deck on an aluminum substructure that's allowing the soil volume for this tree, but allowing people to experience its shade. And having that be a composition, part of the composition with the architecture. And then lastly, I think as you see, we work all over the country, and it's not every project that we get to really understand what makes a place special and unique in terms of its material fabric. But I've spent so much time in Sarasota over the years, and I've spent so much time driving around with my client and looking at places and understanding kind of what the place is made out of. And so we really tried hard to look deeply at the site, understand its texture, its feeling, to understand the kind of Sarasota modern school and what that offers us in terms of proportion and materiality, and then to transform that into our own unique site kind of vocabulary or palette. So that includes everything from like this incredible oolite, which is a native stone that's sedimentary that actually looks like tofu and erodes over time, and like vines grow through it or vegetation grows in it, to that rubber walkway, to our own custom version of shell concrete. So it's a concrete with a kind of shell top course. But all of it's meant to just be of the place and speak to the Sarasota tradition. So here are some of the experiences. As you can see, this is one of the other bespoke decks, learning decks as we call them. You can see the live oak leaf etching here in the deck at this moment of swinging under a big live oak branch over the bayou, and a family swinging. Lots of little details, again, that bring that palette to a realization that we think is quite beautiful. This photo was taken very early on. When you go there today, the stone is no longer white, and it actually is verdant with ferns and different vegetation that's growing up through the cracks, which is kind of beautiful to behold. This is the beach and the sunset viewing area. So it's funny, we actually designed this oolite wall to keep people from the shoreline because the client was worried about people coming here to swim. And then we created a beach on the upfront with a bunch of movable tables and chairs. And everybody just carries those tables and chairs over the wall and comes and puts their feet in the water and sits and watches the sunset. And it's actually a pretty wonderfully spectacular place to be. So, you're up.
All right, so we'll really quickly just talk about agency, which has also been a project, and how we try to kind of bring some of those values from other places back to the office. We don't do timesheets, that's a whole other story, but we try to have a business model that's not about the hour being a financial metric that you're using. So we have to have ways that we talk to our team about overload, about stress, since they can't self-report it in hours in a traditional way. So on our Monday morning meetings, we all talk through our kind of pain measurement scale of what the week ahead is. We were advised really early by a business advisor, too, to try to share some of the traditional business decisions with the whole team. And so we try to run our team through this series of task forces where people really own business decisions for kind of culture, systems and processes, knowledge, and thinking about place and communications. We've tried through all of our work since the beginning to always think about the money that we're using for operations, which is a significant part of what a firm has to do, and how we can look for DBE partners, look for women-owned businesses or minority-owned businesses that we can partner with for photography, accounting, pretty much anywhere that we would spend money. We try to look for those partners. We also really care about understanding how our team is comprised of individuals who think really differently, have really different backgrounds, bring a very different perspective to working on the same project or the same task. And so this is a tool called the Strength Deployment Inventory that everybody at agency takes, and it's been an incredible way to understand ourselves as well as our team. It says that each person is a blue person, a green person, or a red person, and that means that you're coming to something like a blue person like me, trying to have harmony among a group. A red person like Gina wants to get stuff done. And so she's about outcomes and goals. And then we have the green people who are about process, rigor, data. Yeah, they don't ever get stuff done, but they add a lot of value. And so we need each of those things, and you can see how we operate. In good times, we're pretty blue, some of us are red, and then in tough times, we go really green. And so it's really helpful to know, like when we can't make a decision, our team's gonna want data. They wanna know the backup. They wanna know how we got there. So it's really helpful for sort of an organization, especially as we grow. We also try to share our financial outlook really transparently with the team and unpack that. That's something that we didn't come to learn, I think, until we were principals in a previous job. And so we try to just crack open the books and the decisions quarterly with the team so they know that prognosis, they know why we're leaning into certain things. And then we also know that we're part of a big design community and we're just one piece of it, and that it's a real advantage to be able to connect. And so teaching has been really helpful for both of us to kind of grow our thinking and our connections and understand what people care about. And then Gina, since the founding of agency in parallel, had to do two things at once, started WXLA, which is an advocacy nonprofit that Linda also mentioned at the beginning, really focused on how can we bring a more diverse group into building places.
Do you recognize someone up there?
Yeah. Who are you?
Yeah.
Oh, yes. So we see that really as part of this whole system of making, keeping, and caring, and a long-term process that we're just one piece of. So thank you so much.
I heard a term, and I want to know if it's a term you guys developed or if you got it from somewhere else. It was the term gentle density.
Albina.
Because I think there's a lot of like political energy around density.
Yeah.
And so I sort of like I like that theory of gentle density.
We definitely didn't create it. Can't take credit for it. I think I first heard it maybe through our client in Bozeman, Montana, where we were doing a downtown plan, and they are really, butting up against growth. And so they were thinking a lot about growth in a way that is compatible. But I think it's relevant pretty much everywhere. I liked, in Albina, it was really helpful for us that the conversation about density wasn't just about form. We get so wrapped up in that it was about all these other values. But yeah, that was part of the discussion too. How do you do it in a not aggressive way? Plenty.
Well, I'm laughing.
Because what you're trying to do is pretty hard, right?
Yeah.
In terms of the political landscape as well as the private landscape. So this is one, and you turn down projects also.
Okay, you do the turn down projects. That's a sore spot for us, for our marketing. You can talk to that one. I'm laughing because there was a small group of students that we talked to yesterday, and I was telling them about failure and learning from failure, and that community engagement, like the way we do it, is often a lesson from bruising yourself, doing something in community engagement and learning when it doesn't work. And so I was telling them the story of Rebuild by Design.
That's what I was thinking, yeah.
She's like, I know, we're traumatized. We try every time we interview for a job or are working with the community to design the conversation. A lot of times that's like a game or something that takes people out of the gentle density, right? Takes people out of the normal terminology or the normal way of interacting with design and give them something more fun and engaging. And when it goes really well, it's spectacular and shiny and glittery and you just want to rub yourself in it. It's so good. And when it fails, when it doesn't resonate, it's like bombing on stage as a comedian. It's just the worst feeling in the whole world where no one else is into it. And we have experienced all forms of that. Oh, yes. You can. I think we didn't. So in Rebuild It by Design, we had this idea that we were working with the communities of the New Jersey Shore. Sorry, team that heard it yesterday. We decided, Brie and I both really love physical things, and we love cultural memory, and so these communities had been disrupted by Superstorm Sandy. So we thought when we present this work to the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, a cabinet level position of our government, that we should bring mementos from the community. And it was everything from like a snake skin to the last ticket sold to a fair that was no longer operational to saltwater taffy. And while we were presenting the work, we were putting these objects down in front of him, and it flopped so hard.
I think he might be a green.
He didn't enjoy it at all, and but we were committed to it. We were like, we're just going to do this performance of this idea, and then we left, and we were kind of horrified. It was kind of horrifying. Yeah. I mean, I still think it was beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's probably pieces. Yes, and we still love that project and that group, and I think that the Jersey Shore didn't get funding through that, and I think we were a little bit naive also to the power of the dynamic between a Democratic Democratic president and a Republican governor, and just like how difficult it was going to be to fund a project in that context. But what happened after that was that Asbury Park, which really took hold of this process, they kind of had a whole group of community members who ran a local platform around resilience, and they've kind of taken it on at a much more local level. So we had that big flop at the presidential level, which was bad, but it really did kind of galvanize something locally, which has been lovely to see. I think on Albina too, there's so many good stories to tell. They've had a unprecedented gift from Phil Knight, the founder of Nike, that's really going to buoy investment, and they're trying to figure out how to use it not just in bricks and mortar, but really in some of those hubs, the kind of programmatic pieces. But one of the big ideas within the project was the waterfront park, and that was, the whole community was behind that. The chair of the board was really excited about this, that the waterfront should be public, and it shouldn't be developed. And so there's a lot of energy to that, but it's been really hard to get traction around feasibility with the city, I'll say, and every time I show up to one of those meetings, I just, hurts a little bit inside to kind of hear that there's so many bureaucratic barriers to something like that, and people are so willing to think let's do something first of its kind over here, but not over here. Yeah. So there's failures inside every project too, I think.
Do we turn down projects?
Oh, we do. I think when Linda said at the beginning, we're a mission-driven practice, whenever I hear someone say that, I think we have to live up to that. And so we do think about that as we look at project opportunities. And we can talk ourselves into lots of things, but we do try to hold true to that. Yeah.
Oh, hi, I'm glad you came. She was going to miss this for class, so whoever teaches her, just know she did a good thing by coming.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not exactly an answer to your question, but that was that example from Albina where when we, the professional designers curated this deck of precedents that we were trying, the client was urging us intentionally to be non-literal about what was going to happen and to just show lots of ideas. So it was Gaudi and all these things. And so I think what was interesting to us was to see what resonated and how people presented back those things that we've all analyzed and understand in a certain way and position within history, and instead to just see kind of emotional reactions to this architecture to this design and the potential within their community. So that was really fun, and I would say everything they said about those was surprising to me.
Yeah, I was going to say, the first project that Brie and I met on was a flood recovery plan for the city of Cedar Rapids, Iowa. And we were there during the flood, you know, post-traumatic stress and all. Following that, like truly were evacuated out of the city and went back and then did 4 years of recovery work. And working with communities that had lost their homes, you know, who were coming to public meetings, and the planners, the planning team wanted to talk about, you know, the vibrancy of a future, and they were still trying to figure out where they should live. And we had a client there that really schooled us on accessible language, accessible drawings, honoring community feedback, not using jargon, not making drawings that are abstract that people don't understand, because you're robbing people of their agency by doing that, right? By obfuscating design through the way we draw and talk. And so that's been, I think, a really big lesson learned. A lot of times I think, say the idea like I'm explaining it to my mom, who's not a designer, and if she could get it, then that's success, you know? And so I think that's probably the biggest lesson learned. And that's hard, because we do wrap ourselves around our little jargony axles sometimes, and we like our language and we like our drawings, and sometimes you realize nobody knows what we're talking about.
We're talking to ourselves.
We're talking to ourselves. So you know, if you're really doing community engaged work, you have to broaden that, and you have to think differently about how you present information. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, please.
Along those lines of working with non-architects and designers, how often do you work with engineers during your planning and design process? For the Sarasota project, did you work with water engineers a lot during that?
Yeah, we love working with engineers on all projects, and also ecologists. Those are like the two, for me, I think, that are the most inspiring collaborators outside of the community engagement work. So on Sarasota, we actually have a maritime engineer who helps us with maritime infrastructure. That's Moffitt and Nickel. We have a firm called Cummins Cedarburg. They do all of the kind of like aquatic resources, biology. They taught us about what a mangrove is and how to think about that. We have civil engineers at Sasaki that help us with stormwater. We have Kimley Horan doing roadway engineering. And so those are all, I think those are the four main engineers, but they're all at the table with us from the master planning process and all the way through all the design and construction. And so we definitely love on all scales to have a deep commitment with natural sciences, natural systems. And so we'll oftentimes, even the largest scale master plan, have an ecologist who's helping us to understand the native ecosystems of a place and how to build within those respectfully or adapt within those, right? Yeah. So I think everything we showed tonight probably had some form of engineering and some form of ecology embedded. Yeah. Thank you so much for spending this time with us.